We'll get started. It's great to see everybody virtually today. Welcome to the UWM Department of Urban Planning Innovative Cities Lecture. My name is Bob Schneider. I'm one of the co-chairs of the department along with Carolyn S. Wine. We welcome you today, and we want to start with our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge in Milwaukee that we are on traditional Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee homeland along the southwest shores of Michigamme, North America's largest system of freshwater lakes, where the Milwaukee, Menominee, and Kinnickinnick rivers meet, and the people of Wisconsin's sovereign Anishinaabe, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Oneida, and Mohican nations remain present. We feel it's important as planners who are working to create more equitable communities that we share resources to deepen your knowledge and connection with Indigenous communities. So you can see some of them there. Welcome to our Innovative Cities lecture for today. I'll introduce this lecture in just a second, but as a heads up for next month, on March 6th, we'll be hearing about the City of Madison's success in affordable housing implementation on March 6th. Today, we'll get right to it. We'll hear from Barry Gore. He's an urban planner and designer specializing in public transit and land use. He's worked in the public and private sectors on innovative transportation visions and strategies. He'll be talking about rethinking passenger rail options, 19th century freight lines, or Townless Highway. Welcome, Barry. We really appreciate it. Folks who are in the audience, feel free to post comments and questions as we go along. Barry, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. And thank you for UWM for hosting this lecture and for everyone who's attending. So I'm going to go really fast and I've got a ton of slides. This is 15 years of research, analysis, and planning and design work that I've taken on sort of pro bono and grew out of the Campaign for Yahara Station, which was a citizens group that promotes a certain location in the city of Madison for a new intercity passenger rail station. So the presentation will conclude with that, and you'll learn more about that later. So let's just get started. And what I'm hoping that we can achieve from today's lecture is that really what I want to do is inspire you to look at intercity passenger rail as a mode and at different ways of promoting it. And many of you probably heard about the Brightline project in Florida. The first time I saw or heard about this project, I saw this rendering. And I assume I'm also speaking to a lot of architects and architecture students and planners. So as we go through it, you'll see different images that I think are important. And when I saw this rendering, I wasn't exactly sure what I was looking at. I was pretty sure it was a Skidmore, Owens, and Merrill rendering. And this was from 2014. And I was like, man, that really looks like something that would be really cool. And that was commissioned by Fortress Investment Group to promote Brightline, Miami Central Station. A lot of this lecture too, we're going to go back in time, back and forth, and go across geographies. This base map, I captured, I believe, actually something's covering it up right now, but it was from 1994 is what it says. Okay. And you can see that the blocks in downtown Miami where the train station used to be just sat fallow for many decades. And the train used to come in at grade, and so it blocked all the streets when it came in. But that's where it was. I have to click on this again. And then going back and forth in time, we can get on Google and kind of toggle back and forth. Here it is under construction then in 2017. In 2021, that's how it's finishing up construction. And you start to see it rise from that site to residential apartment towers, concourses, street level shops. You can see the train station is elevated. And so what they did is that they created a structure and they started to elevate the viaduct over the streets so that the new trains coming in are not blocking the streets. You can see the older commuter rail also elevated in the background there, but this is all brand new in 2021. This was a screen capture from a Brightline video in 2021, and you actually see the train coming in. It's really important, this making it come in at this level. It's the same thing that happens in Chicago. The three main stations downtown are elevated. And then what they did is they're also a real estate developer. So they're developing the space, they're renting out apartments, they've got office space, and then they've got 2 levels of retail space, one at the ground level and then a mezzanine level. And even some of their restaurants, the one called Mary Mary's, becoming quite sort of well known. And in Madison, they were talking about public market, and it's like, yes, we can incorporate those into the train station itself. So that's what they've done. This is the schedule, and this is important. So Brightline is not fooling around. They've got a schedule here, and as you can see, it's 18 round trips a day from Orlando and West Palm Beach to Miami. And the first train leaves West Palm Beach at 5:02 a.m. and the last train returns to West Palm Beach at 2:05 a.m. So you can take the train down the coast and go to a basketball game, go to a show, go out to eat, and there's still plenty of trains for you to get back home. So who's behind this? Well, the guy behind this is named Wes Edens. He's one of the partners in Fortress Investment Group. He also happens to be a co-owner of the Milwaukee Bucks. So people in the audience from Wisconsin, this is a known person. He was in town just last week, I heard, for one of the games. They created a first phase from Miami up to West Palm Beach, and then over the last few years, they've been working on Brightline Phase 2. And you can see part of it goes up the Atlantic coast, and then it turns west to Orlando. And that piece is the one I really want to focus on during the presentation. So this is a brand new corridor, 35 miles of new track in an alignment that was not there before. They started construction in October 2019. They finished construction 3 years, 9 months from the start. So I think this is one of the things about private investors is that they are on a timeline to start paying back the investments that were put in, and they need to start generating revenue. So in terms of the planning and construction, they are on a different timeline than some of the public sector projects that we see. So it's a model. This is an aerial photo, Google, of course, and you can see that on the right where the red arrow is pointing to the old Florida East Coast Railway, which was Henry Flagler created this railroad down the Atlantic coast and created places like Miami Beach, providing access to people from up along the coast up north. And then the second arrow to the left, you can see that what they've done is they're constructing that new alignment that I was talking about. And you can see it's going under one of the roadways. And then this is going over Interstate 95, coming up on a small 2-lane road, and we'll get closer. So just looking at Google again, going back in time, I was able to capture these. I think you probably can do it yourself as well. And you can see the construction going on. So this is a big project, and there's a reason that they're eliminating all of the grade crossings. And here's a little 2-lane road, but they're not going, well, it's only 2 lanes, we're just going to cross it at grade. They're like, no, we're eliminating all grade crossings in this corridor. You can see the track at the bottom there, which is when it was under construction. This is on Highway 258. It is a highway between Orlando and I think they call it the Beach Line or something like that. It's owned by the state of Florida, one of their sort of tollway entities, and they actually reserved space in this right of way for some kind of transit to the coast years ago. And so that was part of the state of Florida's investment in this project. It is Brightline's a private company, but it also has significant public investments, including public investments in the Brightline Orlando station. The state of Florida invested $250 million in creating this Brightline Orlando train station. So yes, it's a public-private partnership, but privately operated. Well, and I guess we're doing okay on time, so I'm going to go ahead and click on this video, and hopefully we can take a quick little look at. I won't do the full screen on this. I'll just let it go. Hopefully it'll load. Okay, so that's fun. Are we still here?
Yes,
Can you-
we are.
Okay, I wasn't sure
was
coming
fun.
back. All right, good. So that was fun. But you see the potential then, because the corridor doesn't have any grade crossings, they can just go as fast as that locomotive will allow it to go. And that was their first project. They actually said, Wes Edens was on a report a few months ago, and he said they're actually reaping profits from the ticket sales already, which he didn't think was going to happen. And they connected to Orlando. So it's become part of the transportation system there. It's a lot faster than driving. They have a second project. It's called Brightline West. And this is something that other people had started the project. Brightline sort of bought the environmental documents, I guess you would say, and the approvals. And then they started to work on creating a new train from Las Vegas into the Los Angeles metro. It is going to connect to the regional commuter rail there in Los Angeles. And again, like Brightline, that corridor we were just showing you, what they are going to do is they're going to go straight down the middle of the interstate highway. And this train actually is going to approach, I believe, something like 180 miles an hour. So this is similar to other high-speed rail in other countries. Again, part of the real estate development, they actually bought 100 acres, I guess, on the southern part of the strip. I don't know how you can just kind of show up and buy 110 acres of land near the strip in Las Vegas, but that's what they did, and it's not too far away, so there could be good connections into the strip as well. And the person who's in charge of Brightline West also is a representative for the Milwaukee Bucks again. So I only bring that up not to say that, you know, it's potentially some leaders here in Milwaukee or Wisconsin could reach out to them for some advice and try to understand what it is they're doing in relation to what it is that we're doing. And so that brings us to the real point of the next point of the conversation, which is that this is how I've conceptualized where we're at right now. And I'm calling it a decision point, but it's only a decision point as well as if the people who are sort of running the project here in Wisconsin recognize that they do have some options. And so far, I'm not sure that really is on their radar. But on the left, you can see there, I've got a column where I've got Amtrak and Canadian Pacific Railway. That operates in the historic Milwaukee Road alignment. It's shared passenger and freight track. Right now, it's limited to 79 miles an hour. There's many grade crossings, impacts to small towns and cities. Amtrak is talked about taking baby steps, and all the private investments, federal and state money, will then be owned by CP Rail, well, at least in the railroad infrastructure. Stations might be different. And then CP controls, the private company controls the frequency of Amtrak. Right now, the concept is that this one line will go to St. Paul, but it won't serve Madison, and the trip from Chicago to St. Paul will take 7.5 hours. So that is a long train ride. Or we could do something different, and that's what we're going to look at right now, is actually build new track down the alignment. I'm not going to go through that whole list there, but we'll come back to all those points, that in fact there is a way that the public could invest in this, and then the public would actually control the speed and frequency. And I mentioned a couple personalities, but if we're going to talk railroading in Wisconsin, we have to go back to Byron Kilbourne, and so many things in Milwaukee go back to Byron Kilbourne and the decisions that he made. And I found some interesting commentary on how he put together the first railroad in Wisconsin. The one thing that a lot of people understand about Mr. Kilbourne was that he was a canal builder from Ohio. He moved to Milwaukee and he wanted to build a canal. So here is the canal graphic that he was trying to get approvals to do. And I would note that canal obviously has to be along waterways. And what happened then was that project fell apart and we were moving on to railroads. You look at, this is the first alignment that was created for the first railroad in Wisconsin. And it launched on March 4th, 1851. So that is 173 years ago. And when I looked at this, you might have the same reaction that I did, which is, why is this track just kind of wiggling all over the place and going north and then going south and going north, going west? And again, I think that the canal building influenced it a little bit. I did a lot of research, went to the stacks, tried to find out why did the alignment end up that way. But what I found by searching online actually was this article in the Wisconsin Magazine of History from 1947, a series of articles, series of letters from an early surveyor, 21-year-old Charles Lindsay from Vermont. And he comes to Wisconsin to start laying out the alignment for the second part of that first railroad in 1852. In his letter to his father, he says, they never had an engineer on here that had ever been on another railroad. It seems that the said Byron Kilbourne, the former president, was a scoundrel and sunk a good deal of money for the company. He appointed himself chief engineer and made a miserable location from Milwaukee to Waukesha, very crooked and about 4 miles out of the way. But to be fair to him, there also, those of you that live in Milwaukee realize there is a subcontinental divide in the way. So that change in elevation, it was just much too steep for steam railroads, extremely heavy steam railroads. And so they typically kept to railroad valleys and closer to those waterways where the grade wasn't as high. You can see at the bottom there, it says Chicago and Northwestern Railroad. They did find a way around that hill that was a straighter shot, but that track actually is now the New Berlin Trail. So that's been abandoned. So again, Mr. Lindsay is working his way across Wisconsin and swamps and stuff like that. And he's out in the wilderness, but he complains in the letters. He says, by judicious management, they could have shortened the line from Milwaukee to Madison some 12 miles from what it will now be. All this deviation to hit some small village or someone's sawmill. And you can see he was down there in Whitewater, and you're like, well, why were they going that way? It's a little hard to parse that. Here's some other comments he said, what I think were just kind of fun. He says about the people that he meets in Wisconsin, he says they loaf around taverns all day, drinking and sleeping. As for cheese, they appear to be too lazy to make, or else they don't know how. Many know nothing about it. So I would say some things sort of stay the same, but other things change. We certainly learned how to make cheese, which I think everyone would acknowledge. And we also learned how to do railroading. The Milwaukee Road became one of the certainly the country, if not the world's, one of the biggest railroads out there, stretching all the way to the Pacific. This is a graphic that I found. I think from a point of view of graphic design, it's really just a wonderful graphic. And you see how sort of they show where their lines are. And you can see that the one line here, it actually has dot dash on it. That means it's a double line, it's a main line. And that actually is the same line we're still dealing with today. You can see Madison there was not connected to that main line. So that's why it's always been so difficult to get service to Madison. Here's the Empire Builder route, which we've all been known for decades, does not go to Madison. Here then is the service concept that Amtrak is bringing forward for the 15-year vision. The TCMC project that people have been working on hard here in Wisconsin. It does not go to Madison. It's a 7.5-hour trip, as I mentioned. We've been working on it for 14 years. It's one extra slow train per day. So given that situation, I have to think that there is something stopping us. There's something in the way of us making more progress, more trains, and faster. And I think that there are things in the way, and mainly it's freight trains. I think, though, that Amtrak is also misunderstanding the relationship between Madison and the Twin Cities. I know when I went to school in Madison, I knew a lot of people from St. Paul because of reciprocity. And it's closer to St. Paul, so I think the Twin Cities and Madison probably will be one of the biggest ticket sellers. You can see here, the trip actually would be longer, and they're talking about 4 daily round trips. So Brightline had 18 round trips. We're talking 4. So that's only going to have some limited utility for people making business trips and other trips. And I think this also sort of misunderstands the relationship between the geography of these cities and where they are. This, as Brightline keeps saying, they're looking for projects where it's too long to drive, but too short to fly. And that's exactly the corridor we have here between Madison and St. Paul. But this has also been recognized by the federal government in their planning for this corridor. This is what I think is probably the best planning that's been done in the Midwest. And this is some slides from 2017. Again, from the Federal Railroad Administration working with WISDOT and some of the other dots around the Midwest and other partners to create a plan for the Midwest. The Northwest route, they looked at going around. People thought, well, we can't get Wisconsin on board, maybe we just go around. And they looked at different city pairs and they said, no, it has to go through Madison. And they concluded the best solution for Madison and for the network is to route the Core Express main line between Milwaukee and Madison or the Twin Cities via Madison. So that's just a given. And they talk Core Express. Peter Schwartz, the project manager, I talked to him, I said, what should I say? And he says, Madison is a corridor defining market. The study model is unequivocal on the need to include Madison. But, and here's Core Express, in the purple, they're talking, this is real high speed. They're going 200 miles an hour. Every time they increased the speed in the model, they picked up more riders. This was also the conclusion of the French SNCF, which runs their high-speed trains. They came to Midwest in 2009. They said, you want to do high-speed rail? Here's what we would do for you. If you hire us, we'll build this for you. That did not happen. So again, looking at these alignments a little closer, I created these maps off of Google. You can see the old alignment to the north, and it's going to have to go through places like the Village Center in Wauwatosa. It's never going to go faster than 35 miles an hour there because of the way the track is interacting with the rest of the streets in the community, the grade crossings. Or we could go up the big hill. One of the problems too, I said that was the double track, but now over time, the track between Pewaukee and Watertown is down to one track in most places. So it doesn't have two tracks anymore, which means that the freight railroad is going to be very limited in the number of trains it's going to allow to be used for passenger rail. And then we look at some of the other issues here. I just zoomed in along there and just look at the track on Google. Well, you can see what it looks like. This is a tough situation for both grade crossings and then just impacts to residential land uses. Not to mention some of the environmental things, which I will mention in a second. Here's a screenshot from downtown Oconomowoc. And what I count is 6 grade crossings here. And that train, I measured it on Google, that train is 2 miles long. And then a screenshot looking at where the tracks on Summit Avenue cross Main Street in downtown Oconomowoc. And I guess I'd say I'm not a traffic engineer, but that looks like a very difficult situation right there for having trains go much faster than what the freight's going right now, or even the freight trains. Very difficult situation. And then just looking at the way the track was laid out, they went north to Watertown, but then we have to go south to get back to Madison. So I've measured a couple times. It's about 5 to 7 miles longer by taking that route. And that means that whatever you do is going to cost more money. And that track has to be completely replaced. WISDOT owns the corridor from Watertown to Madison, so they can do it, but it's going to cost a lot of money to take the track that's there now, remove it, put new ballast down, and get it up to where we need it to be for passenger rail. And then crucially, getting from Madison back to the mainline track where the Empire Builder runs now up in Portage, there's about 35 miles, and that is extremely slow track, about 10 miles an hour on that. It has to be completely rebuilt to do anything with it. And that's why Amtrak is not talking about doing this connection in the next 15 years, because it's very, very expensive. And even the project back in 2009 did not have funds to do this corridor. There's also, it's going right through the small towns, and there's wetland impacts. The environmental documents from 2001, it talks about, this is outside of Waterloo between Watertown and Madison. You can see one of the issues with railroading in Wisconsin has been a lot of wetlands. And, they have locomotives sink into the swamp. So what the project was talking about was building land bridges, basically piers that they would put the new track on, and that would impact, it says 13.5 acres of wetland. wetlands north of Madison, and the arrow's pointing at where the track is now. But I put this slide in to point out the large gash across the landscape in the left-hand corridor, and that actually is I-94. So already impacted. So again, just to summarize this, the Madison project, we can rebuild all that track in the existing alignment for 4 trains. Well, we don't know how many trains a day if we rebuilt it all, but right now they're talking 4 trains. Or we can take a longer view and invest in new track down I-94, just like Brightline did in Florida, just like they're doing out in Nevada and California. So we should look at this as an option. And then looking at this roadway, I said to myself, I'm like, well, we take it for granted because, it's just there. But where did this road come from? And, was there a planning theory behind this? There must have been. Where was that? And how was it built and how might it be utilized for high-speed rail? And then if we put stations along I-94, it's, well, how could we access them? Maybe that's the old station, the old track goes right through the little towns because it helped build them. And we need to be able to put the stations in spots where people can get on the train. But maybe there's ways to do it. So that's what I'm going to talk about. So many of you, maybe in grad school, maybe you read this article. I think it was in my mind. I must have read it while I was in grad school. Benton MacKaye, pretty famous regional planner living out on the East Coast. He wrote this article in 1931. He called it the Townless Highway for the Motorist, a proposal for the automobile age. It's a very curious article. I reread it. And he says, once we have grasped the notion of the automobile as a private locomotive, the example of the railroad will give us a clue to its proper treatment. It must have a related but independent road system of its own. One can perhaps characterize it best by calling it the Townless Highway. So this is radical. I mean, highways, if you were on foot or horseback or in a stagecoach, you're always going to the next town. You're not just cutting across the country. You're going to always be shooting for the next piece of civilization so you can rest, feed your horses, fill up, even steam locomotives. They needed to stop in towns to fill up water and get more fuel to keep going. But the automobile is different. Automobile is a radical technology. And he came up with this idea to address that. He says the first principle of the Townless Highway requires that the highway avoid passing through the town. Okay, again, it's curious idea. But he had reasons for this. And it's interesting to read it because one of his main reasons was a land use and an aesthetic region. We okay? So he says in the thing, the photo here is from Kilbourne, Wisconsin, which is now the Dells. Benton MacKaye talks about this. He says the usefulness of the bypass is checkmated by the road town, sometimes called the motor town or motor slum. So the idea was, well, to avoid these impacts of the automobile, we'll build a bypass around the town. And he says, no, that's not good enough. And then he talks about something going on in Harvard. He says the proposed plan was to establish a mile away on a new main road, a separate group of buildings, a station for gas, a station like a railroad for gas, food, restrooms, and the other needed roadside utilities. The station here, you will note, corresponds exactly to the railroad station. So that's just really curious. Never had thought about that. Here's a cover. WISDOT now has all sorts of fantastic stuff that they've digitized, and you can find it in their archives. So I went back to look, well, how did they actually build this road? And then compare that with his statements in that article. He says, plainly then, the fewer the intersections, the safer and faster it will be. The only way to dispose once and for all with the road town is to make it physically impossible. And what he means by that too is that with the road town, because people were putting little hot dog stands and stuff like that along the road, people were turning off and then they're re-entering the bypass. So the purpose of the bypass is being checked by the fact that people are entering and leaving the roadway. So it's kind of bringing along this land use baggage with it. And so it's not really working the way they wanted it. He says to make it physically impossible. So anyways, he says Edward Bassett, chair of the National Council on City Planning, has suggested this simple device and given it the name of the freeway. 1931. On high-speed arteries, the stations on these freeways would undoubtedly be at considerable distance apart, perhaps as much as 10 miles or more, and ordinary traffic would usually cross the express road by the overpass or the underpass. Again, this is a relatively radical idea. I'm trying to trace the history. Okay, how was the interstate built in the state of Wisconsin? Again, they now have they have all of the old state highway maps, and those of us that they're older realize the state highway map was a huge deal. It came out every year, and you would get it, and it was the most important thing in your glove box, if it ever is even in the glove box of the car. And you can go back and look, and I looked at 1959. There are no interstate highways on the state highway map in 1959. So just how fast did they build this roadway called the interstate? On the 1960 map, you see there's symbology showing up now, 94 and 90, and kind of a green line with some dots on it where the intersections are. And even up in the left-hand corner there, you see some dashed lines for pieces that were under planning or construction. And this is, again, where he gets very radical. He says it must disregard all previous turnpikes and local roads unless these by chance should be suited to its special purpose. It will avoid towns big and little, not by dodging around them via bypasses, but by following the less developed territory. So looking for, did we follow this sort of concept? You can see between Highway 51 and Highway 12, or even some of these 78 or 113, that in fact, when they surveyed and laid out I-90 and 94, they looked for the part that did not go through the towns. They just took off across the open land, farm fields and whatnot, and even up along the Wisconsin River, there aren't any towns. So they deliberately avoided it. That was the concept. By 1962, it's on the map, is completed. So the implementation of this is going extremely fast by today's standards. I wanted to show this. Highway 30 was turned into Interstate 94 in 1965. They're almost done with it. The black arrows, I'm pointing out what he called stations, and we would call interchanges. And the one at Johnson Creek, and then another one at Gerke's Corners. We'll come back to that in regards to high-speed rail in a second. But wrapping this up with the article, he says the Townless Highway would be like the railway, an institution in itself, a system. And sure enough, we call it the interstate system. And these reports that they put out every year, the State Highway Commission, you can see how they constructed it in phases. And if you didn't get where I'm headed with all this, I said the Townless Highway concept was based on a railway model. So I think that alignment should be considered for high-speed rail. By design, it is grade separated. It's a sealed corridor that avoids the impacts to small towns. And then just for fun, here's the program. Like I said, you can find everything on their archives. Here's a program from October 30th, 1968. They finished the I-94 across the state. So construction actually started in 1956, but as you saw, it didn't really get going until the early to mid 60s. But within 12 years, they had built 348 miles of that, and it was implemented in phases. So what I'm suggesting is that that's the same thing we should do for high-speed rail. We shouldn't invest in this old Milwaukee Road 19th century railroad corridor with all these impacts. We should invest in new high-speed rail in phases as it makes sense. And probably the phase that makes most sense now is the Milwaukee to Madison phase. And we should do it down we should look at doing it down Interstate 94, and sort of a tip of the hat to the folks that did TCMC and say that actually they got that project going forward when they talked to people up in Wisconsin Dells, which used to be Kilbourne Town. But they had support from businesses and legislative people in the Dells to bring it up there. And to me, it would make sense in the first phase to get past Madison and back up to where we can connect back to the main line double track. And this might be all electric, or it might just be running the same diesel trains that they're running in Brightline. So you might transfer and it might just be on this track, or then it might go on, get on a different train in the Dells or something like that, or at least get to Portage. And so I'll get back to that later with an estimate of what that cost would be. But starting back in Milwaukee, well, how could we possibly do this? And you look at the some of you may be familiar with this graphic. I drew it on top of the east-west I-94 reconstruction graphic. The red line I draw on, that's where the old Milwaukee Road, the CP rail, the Amtrak line, that's what's there today. And actually, I-94 was built in the old interurban right away. I think many people realize that as well. So it was suggested to me we could use that and then get back onto the freeway. Or I think you would also want to look at potentially going down the Hank Aaron Trail, which was a Milwaukee Road alignment. And I'm not sure why that one wasn't kept, rather the other one, but there were probably investments in the double track corridor and not in this corridor. If we did that, it would have to be an elevated viaduct given the use of the trail right now, and this would have more impact. So maybe it'd be better to stay in I-94. If we look at Waukesha County, then the thing that strikes me when I look at it is that, look at Brookfield or Pewaukee, but especially Brookfield in the middle, so you see that the existing track goes through basically the lowest density part of the city, of the community. And so to put a station up there in Pewaukee, it's not really getting, the connections aren't that great, and then it's not really getting you where all the action is, which is really Blue Mound Road. But if we went along I-94 and put a station at Gerke's Corners, and again, this was just me kind of picking it. I didn't do any analysis or anything like that. I just knew that Gerke's Corners was the old traditional crossroads for, I believe, the stagecoaches, and WSDOT does own property there now. But maybe that would be a place, and it would give you better access to downtown Waukesha. Also, putting a station east of the CN track up to Green Bay would make it possible for people coming to Green Bay and, let's say, going to Madison or St. Paul, that they could transfer at Gerke's and continue west instead of going all the way downtown. And then, like I said, with Blue Mound Road really is the edge city, and then Mayfair Road, and perhaps in downtown Waukesha, we could connect from Gerke's much more easily with some kind of transit to downtown Waukesha at Gerke's than we could up on the CP track. And so and the other thing I skipped over it, but one of the things is that this new track down I-94 could also be used for commuter rail to, commutes from Waukesha County into Milwaukee. And that way we're getting double duty for the investment. There may not be any capacity on the CP track to actually add commuter rail. So that's a problem. Again, where would we put the station then? How is this going to work? And what I did is went on Google Earth and I measured this out using one of their measuring tools. In world-class high-speed rail, the typical train set is 200 meters long. And I think that has to do with the physics of going at those speeds and how the trains are constructed. And so they're 200 meters. In many corridors, what they're doing is they actually couple two of those trains together. This is what they're doing out in California now with the high-speed rail in California. The station platform is actually going to be 400 meters long, which is about a quarter of a mile. So I just tried to look at it. Okay, well, if we did it at Gerke's, could it actually be there? And you can see where the looping intersection is there in the big parking lot. That is, the whole place is Gerke's Corners, but that is the park and ride lot that exists there right now. And maybe it stretches across to this new mixed-use development, or maybe it goes to the south, sort of through an office park right there. Or maybe it goes over on this other area where there's some car dealerships and some single-story warehouse pieces, which would, of course, greatly add value to those properties. And then again, looking at that kind of station, what does it mean it's 400 meters long? Well, here's a rendering from Perkins and Will, who is working for the Texas Central Project. This is their Houston station rendering. Of course, it's elevated. And you come in at the ground level and you take some escalators up, but it's elevated, so it's not crossing any city streets. So that kind of gives you a scale or an idea of what that might look like. And then how do you fit that in? Well, going west, Watertown has been a leader. They want the rail service. They always have, and they have been doing planning for it. So, I wouldn't want to leave them out of it. But if, with the land use and even looking back at Benton MacKaye, the land use follows the transportation system, and certainly around the intersection at Johnson's Creek, there is development there. The Johnson Creek was there before the expressway, freeway, but it also might make a good spot for that high-speed rail station. And maybe we could link up the 4 cities there, Fort Atkinson, Jefferson, Johnson Creek, and Watertown, with some kind of shuttle that would take people to the expressway. And maybe that shuttle is a good idea. I didn't research whether Jefferson County has anything like that right now, but it might make sense to do that anyways. Some people, I would say as well, would say, well, yeah, but we don't want to stop twice between Milwaukee and Madison if it's a high-speed rail. If we're going 200 miles an hour, we don't want to stop. But I'm thinking, okay, don't be so dogmatic. It doesn't have to go 200 miles. If it goes 160 or 180 or even less than that, because we're stopping again, it might make sense, given that we need a system that can fit the situation, and we need to provide some stations to serve the population centers. And again, looking back at Google, can we fit it in? Well, just by chance, the 2 roadways where the interchange is, actually a 400-meter platform would fit quite well. And you could attach pedestrian bridges back to either side or both sides of the land, and then give people, create some kind of mixed use developments there, big parking lots, whatever, for the station and other uses. So it looks like that could work. Well, but am I getting ahead of myself here? Will it really fit along the expressway like we saw in Vegas, the Bright Line West? Their median's a little bit wider, but I went on Dane County GIS. They have a measurement tool, and I measured the freeway, or the median, and it varies, but right in that location, it's 46 feet wide. So it seems like that would work. And then going back to Brightline, comparing it, this is the double line track at the airport. It's 34 feet. So 46, 34, looks like it would fit. And then most of that sealed corridor from Orlando to the Atlantic coast is actually only 28 feet. And we might not need a double track, because if the train is going so fast between Milwaukee and Madison, you could see that if it only takes 15 minutes, half an hour to get there, that train could just turn around and go back. It doesn't need to have a train passing it going in the other direction. And that's kind of what they've done here in Florida. And then looking to the north, back on the Dane County GIS, there is not a median in this section of I-94 north of Madison, but look at how much property WISDOT owns to either side. The right-of-way is 287 feet wide, and we've got 80 feet on one side and 70 feet on the other. So it certainly seems like we've got enough right of way to do at least one track, or if not 2. So we're doing pretty well here. I'm coming to the end, I guess. Well, not the end exactly, but I'm going to quickly go through some of the RS station stuff and then stop, and we'll just do it quick. So why is it hard to figure out where to put a station in Madison? Well, it should be pretty obvious from this. It's because it's on an isthmus. And so this was the graphic that was created back in 2009. At that point, there was a lot of pressure to put it at the Dane County Airport. And we thought, well, can't we get it closer? And here's a spot that's about as close as you can. It is the closest spot to on the main line track that passes through Madison from the north. And actually the city of Madison actually happens to own that site. In my view, there is no sense at all in coming down the isthmus and forcing the train to a reversal. It just doesn't make any sense, and it isn't taking sort of the long view of where downtown Madison is going to be 20, 30 years from now as the East Washington corridor builds out. So that doesn't make a good idea. And then looking at it even from the transit or development point of view, or even just access point of view, you can see that the RS Station site has great access to all the neighborhoods that surrounds it. Meanwhile, Monona Terrace is at the bottom of a cliff, and you can't develop any part of the lake. Yes, that's where the major density or the office space is now in the capital, but the future is going to be down the isthmus. And riding on the train to Madison, you'd cross East Washington, you see the capital, and you're like, okay, we're here. You instantly know, and even if you're looking at your phone, on your map on your phone, it helps to have a landmark to go orient yourself. And you're like, okay, I see the isthmus is that way, and I know where I am. The question is, will it fit between East Washington and East Johnson, the two main arterials on the isthmus? And well, here's a train set. Boston to DC. It's about 700 feet long, the new Amtrak Liberty. Can I fit it on a site that's 950 feet wide? I think I can. So I tried to show back in 2009 with the tools that I had that I think we could fit that platform in there. Here's a SketchUp model that I created. It's, you know, so anyways, that's 600 feet was the spec at that point. The idea was to have the train station with the entrance on First Street and then have it go over the track so that we could get it down and have a cross-platform transfer to another local train that would be waiting to continue down the isthmus. The big train can't go down the isthmus, but a local train can be waiting there for a ticketless transfer. Here's some CAD drawings I had. I'll just flip through these again to prove to myself that it would work, and I think it will. Again, the track on the left is right there, and again, we could have a local train going to downtown the UW campus. I created this, which shows different intermodal hub opportunities, lots of different things going on here. I'm just going to touch on one of them. One is that from East Johnson's a one-way street from UW-Madison going east. It's two-way here at First Street, but the great advantage of this site is that you can take a right turn at First Street, and then you can drop off at the station entrance and then take a right turn on East Washington and go back downtown if you're, you know, taxi or whatever. So that is really excellent access. And then the BRT, which is under construction right now, will have a station at First Street. So again, get off the big train. If you don't want to, you know, if there's no local train or you want to go somewhere else down East Washington to the Capitol, to State Street, you take the BRT. I did, you know, I reluctantly looked at a different option of putting the platform in the rail yard. And again, I would say to the city of Madison, do not give up the station. The station is a prize. I would not give it up to private property when the city of Madison owns the best site. And even if you put the platform across the street, we can have a pedestrian bridge back. I did this in SketchUp a couple of years ago, and I estimated we could get 2 million square feet. The limiting factor is the Dane County Airport height limits. 12 stories, I don't know, my estimate, 200 million. All this is back of the envelope estimates. Other people that are smarter than me, have more talent and technical expertise, you can take a look at it yourself. I'm just saying maybe this would work. Coming to the end now, we're looking at, I said to myself, well, what if it was 200 miles an hour? Could I really do this if it's coming down the interstate? So the idea was to come in Highway 30 and then drop into the WISDOT rail corridor and maybe the city trail as a viaduct, hit Yahara Station and then go back out. It could use the existing track, but some pretty tight curves there. So maybe it goes down to the river. Again, impacts the property, yes, but this is a huge project. This is tens of billions of dollars to make this work. Can we fit that in there? So lastly, urban rail, I say, is grade separated. When Madison's thinking about this, they should look at Chicago and go, we can't really have this blocking our streets. Even if it is a short train, you know, 4 trains a day. Okay, well, we need to be thinking more. We need to be thinking 20 trains a day. Getting to end here, almost wrap it up just a second. New viaduct being built in downtown Chicago. So it could look like something like this. And this is the brown line. Swoops over. So I looked at that. Could we do an elevated station at Yahara Station? It might look something like this. This is the SkyTrain out in suburban Vancouver, British Columbia. Perkins and Will, I think a beautiful, very simple, elegant design, but really beautiful and could work. Back in 2009, there was an article written about everything railroading Madison, and they said, we think that this Yahara Station idea is probably the best idea. And they said the downside is we're not shovel ready. So it was like, oh, we got to stay shovel ready, blah, 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 2009. So now we're 15 years later. Well, what would this cost to actually do this phase 1? I estimated this, I think, very, you know, this would be the highest it probably would cost, 18.5 miles of viaduct coming out of Milwaukee. Maybe it could be less, 7 miles of viaduct and then running at the surface. Based on other project, I came up with $12 billion. So if we did this, that would be phase 1, Milwaukee to the Dells. Phase 2, go to Eau Claire. Phase 3, finish off Chicago and Minneapolis. 2 more slides. What can we do? Suggestions for advocacy. We can get active. We need a rail group from the Twin Cities to Chicago, an advocacy group, probably with some corporate sponsors. out in Seattle, Portland, and Vancouver. They are looking at this and they have produced reports. Also, very importantly, this WISDOT is starting the corridor ID service development planning. They are writing a scope for what the future of this corridor is going to be planning. We need to encourage them through our state representatives that they should also look at I-94 as an option. And then lastly, establish a tri-state high-speed rail commission, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Illinois. There are some leaders out there who might be interested. Governor Thompson, Ray LaHood, former Secretary of State, get them working on it. And again, we need to partner with those other states. Last slide, what can do. So this, I got a text from my brother last September, and he says he's going 300 kilometers per hour between Madrid and Barcelona, and that trip cost him $19. So a lot of people from the United States are experiencing what high-speed rail can do. I encourage those people to get active and not just accept that we don't have that, because there's no reason we shouldn't. I would say you need to hire the best designers to work on your project. We should construct a track down I-94 owned by the state of Wisconsin. We should open that track to competitive bids. That is how he got a $19 trip to Barcelona, because they are now running 4 different entities, 3 private companies and the state railroader are running those trains. So they're using the capacity. And then we could look at a regional transit authority to do that commuter rail from Waukesha to downtown Milwaukee. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. This is fantastic. I love the combination of history and inspiration. So thanks for covering all that and, packing in so much to the last 50 minutes. I encourage anybody who has questions to type them into the chat. I'll go to try to catch some of those now. There's one technical question from Carl, 1,000 Friends of Wisconsin. Does the existing horizontal and vertical curvature of I-94 support high-speed rail, like up to 180 or 200 miles an hour? Is that possible?
I don't know, but what we did see a graphic there from the French railroad, and they had their map showed it going down I-94. So I think I-94 is pretty much a straight shot. When I originally drew it through Waukesha, out by the Waukesha airport, I thought, it does kind of curve. I was like, could we just shoot across this industrial area? So there are points where you might get out of the 94 alignment if it makes sense to actually reduce the radius of those curves. You might. Other people have looked at this as well, as including the high-speed rail group based in Chicago. So they do have some studies on it, and they do look at things like that.
We have a question as well, and it gets to your final points about, okay, what do we do now for folks who want to advocate for this? So at what stage in the current planning process would a pitch like this be entertained as a potential alternative? What's the phasing of that?
Yeah, right now. And I was talking to one of my colleagues yesterday, and I said, well, how do you influence WISDOT? WISDOT's going to take on the planning. They're going to hire a consultant. They're going to write a scope of work right now for that corridor. And so what we want is to get that in the scope. But the application of the federal government says we're going to use the Canadian Pacific, Kansas City alignment. So that's what they're going to do, unless people. And so who can direct WISDOT? Well, the Secretary of Transportation could, the governor could, but also individual state representatives. So those are our representatives, and I guess I'm going to have to figure out how I can contact them and say, I think we should also look at this.
Sure.
And also talk to those Brightline people, because they're doing it.
And there's a question related to Brightline from Dan Adams. Yes. How did the Brightline acquire the right-of-way that was outside of the interstate right-of-way that FDOT might have owned in Florida, to get those small pieces where they were needed? Do you have a sense of how that happened?
If I understand it, he's saying outside of that. So the one highway we showed, right. The state of Florida had already purchased that with the direction of doing that. Well, when they got into Orlando, then it did get kind of interesting for them, because I don't have the maps and I haven't looked at it, but they kind of got in a tug of war, I think, between Universal and Walt Disney. and then some of the stuff in downtown Orlando, and people were like, no, go this way. And they're like, no, go this way. So I'm not exactly sure how they're doing that, but they also are partnering with one of the commuter rails there, Sunrail, I think they call it. And then they're going on to Tampa. So it's a combination between using those state owned properties and maybe, I'm not exactly sure, but getting agreements to cross private property. But I'm not sure if that's what they're doing or not. And out in Brightline West, they're coming in to a Metro Link station, a commuter rail station, and then you have to transfer. So it'll be difficult for them to get a different alignment, I think, in there.
Noah asks, why not work with the existing right-of-way of the Canadian Northern trackage, CN trackage, as it connects more people compared to the I-94 corridor? This is that development and serving people. Would that draw in more public support? So I guess, how do you address that concern?
Yeah. Well, the first time it was suggested to me that we use I-94, I was like, what? Because I mostly do transit development planning, and I was like, no, I'm always in meetings where I'm like, no, we have to stop trains so we can pick people up. But I think that this is a different situation. If you wanted to invest in that corridor for a slower commuter rail, but even back in 2009, or when they were doing the environmental documents, you had places like Waterloo, or even Watertown, or even Madison itself, where they were like, we're going to have to close these roads. And people are going to be like, oh, I don't like that. And no, by the way, that train's going to be rushing through your town at 79 miles an hour, which is fast. And one of the issues that Brightlines had on their old alignment that does go through all the little towns along the Atlantic coast is that people are trying to jump the gates and they are being killed. So that happens frequently. And so it's a safety issue, it's a speed issue, it's kind of a construction issue as well, because Brightline West, they're going to hire 10,000 people, and they're going to try to get that done before the next Olympics. So when you get into the urban areas is where it gets really, really difficult. That's why we might have to go to viaducts in a lot of spots. Otherwise, the impacts are just too great.
So we got just a couple of minutes left here. Blythe has put a survey up in the chat at some point. Maybe she can put it there again so that folks can respond to that before starting to head off. We'll take a couple more minutes for questions, though. Also pointing out that this, you can get AICP certification maintenance CM credit. That'll be posted on the Wisconsin APA site soon. Just a quick reminder about the March 6th Innovative Cities lecture that'll be coming up again. But I wanted to just sort of ask a final big picture question, and maybe if anybody else has something in the chat, but it seems like you present a really great inspirational idea. Why do you think it hasn't been picked up in the official alternatives yet? Is it just institutional momentum, or is there something else that you see as the barrier?
Well, no, I think that with this model, this idea of going down the interstate, I just think that it's one of those things that, especially, people just are not aware of it. And now, like you said, with the video, you see the train going zoom, and you're like, oh, well, I didn't know we could do that. So mainly, certainly, at the higher levels of the state legislature or whatever, that people just aren't aware that that is possible, and they really didn't think about it. And it's like, well, could we do this? If we could, then maybe we should. There are other people besides myself and groups. There's a UW-Madison group that's forming. So again, I'm going to talk to them, and maybe we can figure a way to reach out to UW-Milwaukee and Marquette and MSOE and get younger people involved and going, you know what, there isn't any reason that we shouldn't at least look at this. But then I would say, you're exactly right in terms of institutional momentum. It's like, no, that's just the way. I was on a call, and I should mention the city of Madison studying the station location now. And someone on a chat like this, he said, could we elevate the track? And it wasn't me writing in, but the engineer who's working on the project said no. He's like, no. And I'm like, well, okay, what's that answer based on? And he said, we're working with the freight railroads. So that's kind of Amtrak's way of doing stuff. They work with the freight railroads. and they're very cautious about how they're doing all of this. And then honestly, the railroads are, let's say they welcome massive state public investments in building new track for them, and then maybe they give you 4 trains a day. So there's a lot of issues going on there.
Well, just one final question here that I want to note, and special shout out to Blythe Waldbilling. She's been doing an amazing job of putting links into the chat as you've been talking to give supporting resources. But one question was, are there any other resources that you want to point people to as they prepare to write letters in support of this? Is there 1 or 2 great resources that they could tap into for that purpose?
And
I'm
our
not really-
email will include all those links. So anything you provide,
Right.
everybody who's registered will receive that.
Yep.
There is the High Speed Rail Association. There, just Google High Speed Rail like association or something like that. They'll come up. And then also there is the what is it called? The Rail Passengers Association. Now these folks, especially Rail Passenger, I mean, they're longtime advocates, but they're very focused on trying to make this Amtrak model work. Although everybody's excited about Brightline as well. So, but I think in this case, what I'm suggesting is we need a new group. There was, the one slide I had on, there's a group out in, I don't know if they called Cascadia Rail or something like that, but I don't know if they had money from Microsoft or who was supporting them, but we need some corporate sponsors and some civic leaders to go, you know what? We need a group. We need a group from Chicago to Milwaukee to Madison to Eau Claire to the Twin Cities, and we need a group, an advocacy group that isn't relying on someone like me just to do it for free. We need to hire some people and start creating materials and advocacy, so that's what we need. And I would say too, when you look at this corridor, this corridor needs to work together because we are in a global competition. And when you look at the cities that I mentioned, those are high-powered cities with corporate headquarters, great universities, population centers, and wealth. And we should be looking at ourselves and going, we have to work together across this corridor to make these sort of investments happen. If we don't do it, other corridors are going to do it, and we're going to be left out. And we're going to have a hard time competing economically with them.
Well, we will end it there. Thank you so much, Barry Gore. Fantastic presentation. Thanks for everybody to attend today, and we look forward to seeing you at our next Innovative Cities lecture on March 6th. Thanks again, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Barry. We'll see you.